So hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar by Discover the Universe. I recognize a few names in the participant list, so thank you for being there. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Julie. I am the director of Discover the Universe. And if you're new to our program, very briefly, we are an astronomy education program, and our goal is to help you, educators, bring the beauty and wonder of the universe to your classroom and or with your groups if you are more on the informal education side. So I'm very happy to have many of us live tonight. Please note that the first part of the webinar will be recorded, but after that, we'll stop the recording to open the discussion. If you have any questions, please use the chat. And for those of you watching the recording, if you have any questions or comments later on, feel free to email us. As you'll see, it's a new program. We're really looking for feedback and comments. So we're looking forward to hearing your thoughts. Sorry. So before I introduce our speakers, I want to acknowledge that I live and work from my home on the traditional land of the Abenaki Nation, who were here long before my ancestors and myself settled in this area. When I first wanted to acknowledge the land I live on a few years ago, I realized there was no official land recognition for the area I live in, which is actually quite rural. So I had to do the research myself, and I have to admit it was a very interesting, humbling, but very uncomfortable and frustrating experience. And I think it's necessary to do it. So I invite you all to do the same, not just take whatever sentence your institution has written for this, but learn by yourself and do the research yourself and learn about the first peoples who lived and hopefully still live there. Land recognition is the first step towards reconciliation, but it's definitely not enough. As many of you, I'm sure, I'm learning more and more about the true history of Canada, of the land and its peoples. And I realize how much systemic racism is still part of our society today. That's why tomorrow is actually the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, and it's very important. So I think this is one of the reasons we're all here today, to learn and discuss how we can do better as educators to build a more inclusive society. Personally, through my work with Discover the Universe as an astronomer and educator, and someone who truly cares about using astronomy to make the world a better place, I try to do my part towards reconciliation, and that's how I became involved in this new project called Astrodigenous. So today, to present the project, we have two people, Heidi White and Christina Nitsis. But before we hear from them, I would like to show you a short introduction by the Mi'kmaq astrophysicist who started the project, or behind the project, Dr. Hilding Nielsen. Hilding just started a new faculty position at Memorial University in Newfoundland. Very busy, couldn't be with us tonight, but he recorded this short video for you. So I will play that right now.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to speak. I'm glad to see that there's a lot of interest in Astrodigenous, and I'm sorry I can't be there in person. Astrodigenous started a few years ago when a PhD student from education came to me with this idea of compiling all these resources from Indigenous knowledges and astronomies from around Canada and North America. And this was such a great project because there's so much knowledge missing, and because of all the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and UNDRIP and our goals to do better. You know, we don't have resources really available for our teachers, our educators, to go in the classroom and be able to talk about Indigenous knowledges in astronomy. And this site became important because it was a way to bring a lot of public resources together so that educators can see them, know that they exist, and maybe start working with them. But what was really exciting about this project was the idea that we don't just have resources that people can plug and play with and just use. Indigenous knowledges can't just be used in the same way that we talk about Western sciences. You know, there's an engagement, a way of learning, and an intentionality that goes with it. And otherwise, we're just appropriating knowledge. So bringing all these things together under Astrodigenous, I hope, is a way to better engage with Indigenous astronomies. And I'm very grateful for the work of all the students and collaborators on this project who really took the lead. So that myself, as a Mi'kmaq person who works in astronomy and gets asked this regularly, what can I do? Well, I can point those people to this website, and hopefully they will learn they will start their own co-learning journey with this content and learn to appreciate and engage with Indigenous knowledges in their classroom. Thank you. Walalia.
So thanks, Hilding, for this great introduction. So our speakers tonight are Heidi White and Christina Nitsis. Both of them were students, or just Heidi just finished actually when you started last year, and Christina was a student until a few days ago, pretty much, a graduate student. I'll let you, both of you, introduce yourself a bit more, but you've been involved in the project for many months now, working in the background, and now the website is live, and we're very happy to share this information with all of you. So for now, actually, everyone as participants, maybe you can stay in the background if you don't want to be recorded. You can turn off your cameras and mute yourselves, and we'll open the discussion about half an hour or so. So Heidi and Christina, up to you.
Awesome, thank you. I will share my screen now and then we can get started. Just give me 1 second here. Okay, and you can all see that okay?
Yes, looks good.
Perfect. Okay, so yes, thank you, Julie, for the very awesome introduction there. I'll start off with myself. I'm Christina. Thank you so much for being here to take part in this webinar today. I'm currently, as Julie said, as of 2 days ago, just finalized my thesis in the Department of Geography and Planning at the University of Toronto. Thank you. Prior to completing this thesis, I completed a Master's of Education at OISE at U of T, where I specialized in anti-colonial pedagogy and critical pedagogical theory. And I'm also a settler to so-called Canada of European ancestry. I'll let Heidi introduce herself and then we can get started.
So my name is Heidi White. As Julie mentioned, up until about 8 months ago, I was a PhD student. I worked with the University of Toronto's Department of Astronomy and Astrophysics, and I am a professionally trained astrophysicist, and my research area is in cosmic star formation. Now, throughout my PhD career, I engaged a lot with education outreach, especially abroad and globally, different initiatives. And so I'm really, really excited that I've been able to start working on Astrodigenous.
Awesome, thank you. So, okay, my mouse is going to do this. That's how we're going to scroll. As we start to begin, I'd like to provide a statement of intent. So essentially, in this webinar, we do not wish to perpetuate settler coloniality, and we hope to do the topic of decolonization justice. Although we are not Indigenous to this land, the three of us here, we recognize that we hold a responsibility to learn and take ownership of how we might perpetuate coloniality and understand how we can take collective action. So we recognize that acknowledging this land is important, but it also doesn't supplement for the necessity to work towards a pedagogy of land reclamation for the Indigenous. So in the context of where I'm writing the webinar from, that's the Haudenosaunee, the Mississaugas of the Credit River, the Huron-Wendat, and the Seneca. At the end of this webinar, we'll provide some links which we hope can assist in your learning. In addition, an important part of anti-coloniality and working towards truth and reconciliation includes consultation with specific Indigenous communities. So we encourage you to continue to learn. And if you do ever decide to reach out to an Indigenous elder or community member, we would like to underscore the importance of appropriately compensating Indigenous peoples for the work they do or any knowledge that they provide to you or your students as you integrate or potentially may integrate some of these resources into your classrooms. In addition, we didn't intentionally plan for the webinar to be hosted the day before Orange Shirt Day or a National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. However, we hope at the very least that if you are a settler educator, that this webinar will help those of you who are afraid or kind of have neglected to acknowledge your privilege to be inspired to take action, to recognize, and then to become active learner in the process of both learning and unlearning what you know, and ultimately willing to take action. So we can begin.
So I'm going to start off today. So perhaps what we're seeing on the screen is familiar to some of us. around the world, people have long gazed up at the stars and sought meaning in them. And humans are pattern-seeking creatures by nature. We often like to connect the stars together. And what we see in these connected dot patterns is largely due to cultural influences. So certain asterisms, which are, connections amongst the stars, that's the sort of formal definition of an asterism, are recognized across cultures and across time. And this is an example of one you're likely familiar with, the Big Dipper. Go to the next slide. So asterisms themselves are often part of larger constellations, such as we can see here. So just to give some definition here again, an asterism is a connection made between stars and the night sky, and constellations are these sorts of connections that are actually recognized by the International Astronomical Union. And so this one is what's known as, the Big Dipper is part of Ursa Major. Next slide. And this is a constellation that most Canadians are familiar with. But as I said, oftentimes these patterns and the connections between the stars, they're shared amongst many nations. And Ursa Major itself, the name itself, is derived from Greco-Roman tradition and its associated mythologies. But, so although this constellation is quite familiar to most Canadians as Ursa Major, it's not actually a truly Canadian perspective. Next slide. So one example of a perspective of these very same stars that is place-based and linked with the cultures of the land that we're on is Mistamusqua. So Mistamusqua in Cree legend is this huge bear that roamed all over the lands. Next slide. Another example would be Muin from the Mi'kmaq Night Sky story of Muin and the Seven Bird Hunters. This story happens in the North Sky, and it describes how these stars that are associated with Muin and the Seven Bird Hunters, how they move around Tatapun, or the North Star, as the Northern Hemisphere moves through the seasons. Next slide.
Okay, so as Heidi's demonstrated, there's obviously been a lack of non-Western perspectives, which is prevalent across many disciplines. I know myself, growing up in the education system in Toronto, I never learned about these Indigenous perspectives. And when it comes to astronomy, we really see an underrepresentation of Indigenous astronomy knowledges, or IAK for short. So curriculum in Canada has historically centered Eurocentric knowledge as being the dominant or correct perspective. And this is only the knowledge that gets taught in the classroom. And students end up leaving with a very narrow perspective on various topics. And unfortunately, this suppresses non-white, non-Western knowledges, ideas, and perspectives, as Hilding has mentioned in his intro. So with this project, we hope to completely change this narrative of how educators interact with IAK, and we want to foster their own growth along this journey as well. So we also want to acknowledge that this won't be easy for settler educators to unlearn, dismantle, and try to really understand how to appropriately incorporate this knowledge. And also want to underscore that we ourselves are also learning in this process as to how to appropriately present it to educators through this platform. But we do hope that we will help to support both settler and Indigenous educators and challenge them along the way. So this is our team at Astrodigenous, and we span many very different disciplines. So academically, we have people from the Department of Astronomy, we have myself in geography, OISE, history, and we have team members who work in education and outside of education within academia. We also have both settler and Indigenous members. So each member of our team brings a different perspective, their own positionality, and how they can approach what we do. And we are so grateful to be able to work with each and every one of them.
So in our talk today, we are going to be presenting Astrodigenous, as Julie mentioned. Astrodigenous is an online portal designed to specifically address the issues of erasure that Christina outlined just a couple slides ago. Astrodigenous aims to amplify the voice of Indigenous sky perspectives in Canada by collecting together resources which relate Indigenous sky knowledge, and then moving forward to connect K through 12 teachers and the astronomy outreach community in Canada with these resources. Next slide.
Awesome. So this is a screenshot of our website. So as Heidi's mentioned, the purpose of creating this website was to act as a hub for teachers and educators, and really the community members at large, to have access to both a resource database, and then we also hope to kind of expand our various learning resources that can foster the professional and personal development of educators. So on this website, you'll find information about us, you'll find contact info, links to our resource database, and then we have 2 different resources that we're piloting. So those include a how-to guide and a positionality exercise, both of which I'll elaborate on later. And then we also would be very pleased if you could just go onto our website when the webinar is done, have a look, and then give us your feedback as well. So I will link a feedback form too. And the goal of this website, again, is to create a space where educators can connect both with the resources, but as Hilding mentioned, we don't just want it to be kind of a plug and play. And we also think that it may be difficult for settler educators to start encountering like these resources specifically. So we want to provide some additional learning for them to help foster the use of all of these really, really amazing resources that we have on our portal.
And so just underscoring what Christina said, which is, ultimately the primary goal of Astrodigenous is not just to help you all as educators, feature these resources and these activities in your classrooms. The primary goal is really to ensure that they're featured intentionally and mindfully. And we believe that this means ensuring that there are clear connections between the resources. We are able to identify clear connections between the resources and provincial curriculum goals. And most importantly, that when they are featured in the classroom, these resources are presented in a manner which is respectful to the Indigenous traditions from which they are derived and non-appropriated. And so Christina will now jump into a little bit how we aim to support you all in doing that.
Awesome, thank you. So one of the main aspects of this website is, again, to provide a space for educators to begin to challenge and understand their own positionality before thinking about how they even use these resources in the classroom. So the following is a sample of one of the kind of modules we hope to launch for educators and to really kind of improve on. So again, we'd really appreciate feedback, but this is essentially a how-to guide and a positionality exercise. So the how-to guide is, you can think of as a condensed document meant to provide educators with some guidance on how to begin thinking about positionality. So it's geared towards settler educators. We provide things like definitions of big terms, and then some prompts that we believe if you kind of sit down, we include like some supplies and then time and consistency. So you can get yourself really like situated in a great headspace and start to encounter these like really difficult questions that you may have to ask yourself. And then once you've done that, the hope is that you would start there. And then when you're ready, you would come to our resource guide. And this is where we want you to really start thinking about connecting the core themes of the resources on our database to the provincial curriculum requirements and within your classrooms. So we hope that this can foster your own learning, helping you to understand and develop your own pedagogy if you're still kind of working with it. And then we also want to encourage cross-curricular connections. So ultimately, thinking about astronomy and beyond, how you can take these astronomy resources and IAK knowledges and apply them to like an English class or a math class. And we want to really kind of encourage and foster all educators to feel as though they can encounter these resources and feel comfortable with doing so. Okay, I think we'll go on to the next slide.
So then the next step would be actually connecting you with the resources. And there was a lot of discussion amongst the Astrodigenous team once we had put together hundreds of resources of how we could do this, what would be the best way to connect you all with them. Ultimately, we agreed that the best thing would probably be to create something like, an equivalent of Google search, and that would be the most intuitive. So we'd love some feedback on whether or not, this is something that does seem approachable. So we've basically stored all of these resources in a database online and created a search portal where you can actually search through them. So if you click on the resource portal tab of the website, when you go there, you will be connected straight to our search engine. Next slide. And so one thing we've tried to do here to help you all in making those connections between your, the resources themselves and, curriculum goals is we've integrated a content keywording system into our search framework. So, it's not complete. We are currently in the process of tagging all of our resources by content. And so, for example, Muin, we have a number of resources related to Muin and the 7 bird hunters and that story. Muin is a resource that is tagged with keywords such as, seasons and the moon, endangered species, sustainability, and we plan to, over the course of the next year, actually tag all of the resources, 100 of resources, with whatever connections we identify between the resource themselves, the storytelling, the content, the topic, with what you are all being asked to teach in your classrooms. And so this is really important because we hope it will allow you all to search through the material and find resources that are that make sense to be featured in your classroom instead of defaulting to simple regional searches that are, that approach being really rooted in settler territorial borders, which can lead to, unfortunately, appropriative use. Next slide. And so, for example, you can go to our search portal, and when you go to the search box, you just type in the start of the word. We've put in a number of terms already, and so as you start to type, there is an autocomplete function. So, it'll help give you some ideas of what you can search through. But you can just go ahead, type something in, like for example, seasons. Next slide. You can submit your search. And you find that just using the tag seasons, which is something that is taught at a number of grade levels, but in particular in the sort of like, K through 6 kind of education levels, we have 146 different results in our database that are all linked with the seasons, and little cards come up as our search results that tell you things like, for example, the language that the resource is available in. So some of you may teach in English, some of you may teach in French, but these are all labeled for all of the resources. And then you'll find the title and the authors, and then a link to view the resource. When you click on that link, it will actually bring you to a separate web page that will give you all of the information about the resource, including where you can find it online. And to be clear, we are not hosting the resources on our website. We are simply linking to resources that already exist. So we're connecting you. We're functioning kind of like a conduit to bring you to the authors themselves and where they've put these resources online. Next slide. And then similarly, you can also do multiple tagging, right? So you can put in season, you can put in, for example, Ojibwe, and you'll find that, if you have multiple topics that you're looking to cover, or perhaps you might want to put in a content goal, but then also a specific Indigenous tradition, you can do that, and you'll find resources that are connected with both of those keywords. So we would suggest that everybody sort of try, go to the portal, give it a shot. Again, it is not a completely tagged database, as we have hundreds of resources. It does take some time for Christina and I to go through each one and choose appropriate tags. But this would also be something that we'd be looking for feedback on. If you go there and you happen to engage with some of the resources and you find that we're missing some tags that are pretty consistent across multiple resources, please let us know. As educators, you are the audience that we're looking to gear this towards. So feedback is really, really, really valued. Next slide.
Okay, so what's next for us at Astrodigenous? So with all of this great stuff that we've accomplished thus far, we still have some more goals. So firstly, we hope to expand on our tagged resources, as Heidi has mentioned, because we have many more, a couple hundred more resources to add to our database, and that takes a lot of time to go through. And unfortunately, as it has happened in the past, many of these resources end up changing, or maybe the links no longer work. So it's like very important to keep up to date with these resources as well. But we also encourage that people reach out to us if they know any resources. And kind of one area that we'd like to not just improve, but something we'd like to implement is some sort of form where we can also allow people in the community and educators to submit resources to us. So that would be really awesome. And then we want to encourage that so that the database also becomes a bit more robust. Secondly, we'll work towards developing our learning modules and to run more workshops. So we hope that, in the future, maybe a module can include us going through resources and really connecting curriculum documents more strongly to an anti-colonial pedagogy to help educators foster their anti-colonial pedagogies while also having very clear delineations of what's going on, because currently we're asking you to kind of draw those connections by giving you prompts, but we would hope that we can create a bit of a stronger link there for you educators. And then finally, we would like to consult with Indigenous educators and experts to really go through, review our website, review the database, and give us input, because I think that's a very critical aspect that is missing right now and that we need to really look into further. So that's a big one of our goals there. And then also Stellarium, we're looking to develop a hands-on interactive interface for educators. So if you have any questions about any of our goals going forward, we can address those in the Q&A. And Heidi can talk a little bit more about Stellarium there as well. Okay, so thank you so much for taking the time to attend our session. We hope you've enjoyed this webinar. We want to be able to promote decolonial pedagogy while also addressing that this process is ongoing, fluid, and never ending, and that there's always more to learn. As Julie mentioned in her introduction, it's often very uncomfortable for us as settlers to kind of encounter this knowledge that we have perceived as normal or correct growing up, especially as we get older. But we could say that this uncomfortability is a very important step in the process. So we challenge you, as we continue to challenge ourselves, to look deeper into what you consume, who is producing it, whether that be books, music, news, film, and be really critical of where there may be historical amnesia that you've experienced, or either as someone who has suffered from intergenerational trauma or someone who has perpetuated settler coloniality through this insolent amnesia. So we really want to kind of push you to feel uncomfortable, and that's where we can all grow. So we can proceed into the Q&A in a second. In the chat, I'm going to provide you a document with some resources. It's not exhaustive at all. It's just a place to start if you're really thinking, I'm really overwhelmed. Where do I even start? I'm a settler educator. These are some of our personal recommendations. And then I will also provide you a link at the end of the webinar in the chat, which is a Jotform link. And that's just an area where you can provide us some feedback. If you have any time, we'd really appreciate you going through some of our website. And if not, there's just a section where you can fill in how we did on this webinar today. And that is everything. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you both, Christina and Heidi. And I will now stop the recording. So thanks to everyone who watched that far of the recording.